When it comes to building web-based forms, I try to keep my forms as simple as possible and include as few fields as possible. So when I go to submit a form and it's incomplete, I render an error message at the top, and this is a pretty reasonable way to handle form validation because the form's so simple. If I say, please provide your full name, and there's 3 fields, it should be pretty obvious to the user which field I'm actually talking about. It's the name field. But I understand that there is a certain amount of cognitive load that goes from reading an error message and mapping it onto one of the fields in the page. So I wanted to look at it perhaps a generic way that I might be able to map messages onto form fields using the error information that the ColdFusion server is already providing. So let's just take a quick look at this demo. And first, I just want to set the context here. We're going to be dealing with an account creation form. So under the hood, I have a user service, and this is going to apply some very lightweight validation, basically just lengths and some basic email validation. And you can see that each one of the validation steps throws a unique error type. I'm within the app. This relates to the model. This is the user model specifically, and then here's a field and then what's wrong with it. So I have name and empty, name too long, email invalid, email too long, password too short. And the goal here is to be able to use this error type as a way to indicate which field on the front end is problematic. Now, when I validate data on the ColdFusion server, I'm not necessarily returning the raw error information to the user. Instead, what I'm using is a centralized error translation service that takes the error that was thrown by the ColdFusion workflow and then translates it into a payload that is safe to render for the user. In this example, I'm just passing through the particular type that was thrown by the ColdFusion workflow because I'm trying to keep things as simple as possible. And in most cases, I don't need to be hiding this type. This is what the system is doing and how the validation is working. So I'm not necessarily afraid of exposing most of these types, but there is an option to override this type should we want to keep a particular type internal or private. And then of course, here's a message that I know is safe to show to the user. Now, if we look at this ColdFusion template, let me scroll to the top here. It's a relatively simple template. It posts back to itself, and you can see here at the top of the CFML template, I'm processing the form. Here's that user service we were just looking at. This is where those errors are being thrown. This is inside of a try catch, and when I catch the error coming back from the ColdFusion workflow, I'm passing it through that error translation service that we were just looking at, and I'm getting a response. So this response is going to contain the type, the status code, the status text, the error message, and whatever other normalized error response information my application might need to surface. Now, the goal here is to, again, take these types and use them to associate the error message that I'm currently rendering at the top of the page and associate them to a specific form field. And the way that I'm exploring doing that is including types in the input definitions themselves. So if we come back here to a CFML page and we scroll down, you'll see that with each input, I have a data attribute, data error types, and I list out a set of types that might be relevant to this input. Here I'm listening for the name empty and the name too long. Here I'm listening for the user email dot, and you notice it ends in a dot, so it can take anything after that, any type of validation relating to email. Or I'm looking for conflict. If we scroll back up to the top here, you'll see that conflict gets thrown for a specific email address, and that's to show uniqueness. And then at the very bottom of the page, let's take out this return here so that you can see the effect in the rendering. I serialize that error response, that ColdFusion error response, into the JavaScript context. Then I'm querying for all controls on the page that have that data error types attribute. And I'm looping over and seeing if any of the prefixes embedded within that error type match, or at least match the prefix of the error response type returned from the ColdFusion server. And if it is, I add this isError class. So now with that return statement removed, if I go to submit this form field again, you'll see that we now get a inner pink inset shadow. And if I open up the dev tools here and we look at the element, you'll see that the element now has that isError class. And if I remove it, you'll see that the pink shadow goes away. So if I add my name you'll see that the error shadow now moves to the email address, which of course aligns with our error response here. Please enter a valid email address. And now if I do ben@test.com, which we know throws a different error, you can see that the email address is already in use. This is a different error type. If we go down and look at this, this is now that conflict type, not the email dot type. And we can change this up. And let's say ben@nadel.com. And now it moves to the password as empty field. And we can see that the password has to be longer than 10 characters. And I can fill that in and we're good to go. What I like about this approach is that it's really simple. There's no complex build steps or compilation forms or database introspection or, full stack type safety, which I think is a little bit ridiculous in terms of level of effort, probably. What I also love is that it's a progressive enhancement, meaning I opt into it. So if I were to, let's just, as an example here, let's just select all these data types and let's put an X in front. So we're essentially disabling all of these attributes. And let's refresh this page and try to submit. You'll see that I still get the error message rendered at the top as I always would, but now I'm no longer associating fields. So I'm progressively enhancing, or I'm opting in to this finer grained insight in terms of the error validation. And on top of that, in addition to progressively enhancing, it's also gracefully degrading. So let's just say as an experiment here, I go into my error translation service, and this is going to be for provide your full name. So let's go down to that one. And let's say that I no longer want to pass that back as the error type. So I'll just say that this is now called like app.name.oops, right? And there's nothing here that maps that in the HTML. So now if we refresh the page again, you'll see that I still get the error message at the top like I always would, but we're no longer getting that name field association because something changed in a breaking way. But the form itself doesn't actually break. It just degrades gracefully by no longer associating that input to this particular error message. So I'm just liking the simplicity of this. And I'm sure that there's much better ways to actually apply the mechanics of associating the input with the actual error message. Like I said, right now I'm just adding this isError class. That can be pretty limiting, especially if you consider that people with color blindness maybe can't even see that this red is happening, or it's not clear enough. Maybe it's just a gray. I don't honestly know offhand how the color blindness affects the consumption of color, but I'd have to come up with something else. Like maybe I put a validation message above the form field. There's a lot of different ways that I could go about doing that. The goal of this exploration was to see if I could easily take the error response coming back from the ColdFusion workflow and using that to associate an input field with an error response. And I think that I'm enjoying the direction that this is going in. Again, a lot having to do with the simplicity of the approach. And yeah, I'm sure that people have much more robust ways of doing error handling. And again, I just don't want to opt into those very robust and probably also very configuration heavy and build step heavy types of error response handling. I want to do it in as simple a way as possible to provide a balance between user experience and ease of development.